An old friend of mine shared a cartoon with me years ago, which still comes to mind today when I think about teaching and learning. And I'm going to share that cartoon with you. Give you a moment just to enjoy it. The cartoon depicts the question of whether what we believe we have taught our students is what they actually have learned, if they have learned anything at all. The precocious little boy says he has taught Stripe, the dog, how to whistle, but has Stripe actually learned how to whistle? The riddle suggests the importance of connecting the effort of teaching to the genuine, accountable growth and lasting joy of real learning. Without such connections between teaching and learning, the whistle remains a puzzle. In higher education today, we are turning our attention more to the learner's whistles. We hear plenty today about a shifting paradigm that has traditionally valued the autonomy and authority of the teacher's knowledge at the expense sometimes of the teacher's responsibility to be a reflective practitioner of a complex craft and to study intentionally the impact of teaching on students. Equally, students are being asked to take a more active part in the learning process through the agencies of things such as collaborative and cooperative learning, technology-enhanced activities, undergraduate research, learning portfolio development, experiential learning. These are all movements that have swept the international scene in our colleges and made students aware of their own role in learning. In the European sphere, for instance, of co-talent development, the emphasis on co-creation is a sign of how teachers and students are exploring more robust and transformative models of education. In honors education worldwide, such models happily have long been and still are ubiquitous and inspiring. Teaching and learning are a collaborative venture, or should be, and teachers and students are paying increasing attention to the shared path of knowledge from teacher to student and back again. The path is difficult. The hurdles of change, auditive assessment, accountability, certification, financial exigencies, sometimes oblivious administrations and legislative bodies, and other daunting propositions stand in the way. But the journey is worthwhile because nothing should be more important to us as talent developers as our students' learning. And I should add here that while my remarks in the context of this conference concern honors students, my message does and should apply to all our students. Well, my reflections today are on the value of honors teaching excellence and why focusing on learning is even more important today in a climate when higher education is essentially under siege and our profession and our institutions are seemingly increasingly deemed ineffective, bloated, even unessential. I believe that honors, with its priorities of interdisciplinary learning, active engagement, creativity, risk-taking, respect for diverse learners and ways of knowing and learning, self-directed and self-regulated learning, and more, has been and still is poised to play a lead role in resisting the diminishing effects of today's climate. But I'm not going to play the role of invited expert teacher who pretends to have some special knowledge about things such as educational paradigms, summative assessment, or my favorite, mission-driven institutional strategic objectives and learning outcomes. I'm not here to deliver lengthy research studies from a high pedestal, the kinds of sources that often benefit the scholar or the teacher more than the student, the kinds that make of students not the subject in the philosophical sense of our mission in education, but rather the object, often detached from all the theorizing, quantification, and the forced 20-page syllabi that goes on in the academy today. When we embrace the notion of students and therefore learning as subject, we, especially in honors education, realize that all the recent cliches about shifting paradigms from, quote, sage on the stage or guide on the side, they're all controversies made for administrators, legislators, and the media. In honors, we have long known that the bottom line in our community has always been deep, significant, lasting learning. And that's why we are engaged and committed, for the true joy and reward of the honors classroom comes from the extent to which both teacher and student learn together as interdependent honor scholars. Daniel Limley, in his inspiring book, This Rough Magic, says, good teaching is not done to students. It is done with them. Exactly. For excellent teaching, part of the subject of this address, we have to partner with students, respect them, cherish them as individual learners. I'm fond of saying that I do not teach students. I teach each student each time. It's an important lesson to remember. I teach each student each time. For that student is always a different learner each time that we interact. It's important to remember that as we continue to reflect on what is honors teaching excellence and its inextricable ties to the precious worth of each one of our students. So, in preparation for this occasion today with you, I was thinking about how I could weave together my strong feelings about the unique characteristics of honors with remarks about how much our identities in honors are wrapped up in teaching excellence and in our investments in the transformative learning of each of our students as a form of resistance against societal pressures that keep telling us today that what we do no longer matters. I thought about dwelling on collaboration, risk, responsibility, motivation, reflection, diversity, leadership, creativity, innovation, service, and so many other dimensions of honors education in creating a culture of excellence and talent development in our programs and colleges. But now, how am I supposed to do that in the formal setting of a lecture? With me here and you out there in Zoom land, and with my taking up your time with nothing more than a speech. Seems contradictory to me, a violation of our identity in honors. I warned Marka when she asked me last year, before the pandemic, to deliver a plenary speech at the conference, that I warned her that I'm not much of a lecturer, though I do admire inspiring dynamic lectures. I revel instead in active teaching learning ventures. So I'm afraid then that I'm going to ask you to do some work for the sake of learning. Honors after all, right? So let me start with an exercise that indeed for all of us involves some risk, some work, some responsibility, and some shared learning. Let me ask you to ponder the following quiz. I'll put it up in just a moment. Let me ask you to ponder the following quiz. But since many of us use Apple devices, MacBooks, iPhones, please resist the temptation to peek at your device for an answer. I've conducted this exercise with many audiences, and very few actually could answer correctly across the board. Let me put it up for you.
John, just so you know, the host has unshared your presentation in the meantime because people would wanted to see you. So if you could please share your screen again. Yes, thank you.
Okay, it's not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay, I hope all of you can see this little quiz. So please take a minute to review the following image and identify the correct Apple logo. Enter your selection just by entering in the letter into our Zoom chat. Now, because of the technology, I'm going to leave the image up for just a few more seconds for you to ponder, and then I'm going to unshare the screen so that I can see the chat and see what your responses are. So take a look and enter in your choice in this chat. I notice now in the chat that there are a pretty wide variety of answers, right? And I bet some of those answers are coming from Apple users with iPhones or MacBooks, maybe even in their possession. So it's interesting, isn't it, that those of you who do have Apple products, and even those of you who don't, right? I don't have Apple products, but I have seen that logo hundreds, if not thousands of times. And you would think that after all that exposure that we would have learned that bit of detail, that we would have memorized it, that it's embedded in what we know and what we have learned and what we can remember. But interestingly, right, look at the variety of answers on the chat. And one of my favorites is, I'm an Android user, so I don't have any clue. I like that one. But the lesson here, I guess, is pretty fascinating. So, and not before we move on, I have to confess that I've never been to a formal academic lecture where the audience responded so instantly and so completely. Exactly. So what did you learn about effective teaching and learning from this exercise? I mean, what did you learn about the process of discovery, learning something, retrieving something from memory, maybe viewing each other's responses on the chat room, all these things that entered into the format of this exercise? What did you learn about teaching and learning from the exercise itself? I'm glad to entertain something either in the chat or if you want to speak up, they can unmute you. Let me highlight some of them, right? How often we as teachers don't pay attention to little details, or in fact, as learners, we don't pay attention to details. And the importance of asking questions that can motivate students to find answers, be problem solvers. People often think, there's one here, people often think they know something when in fact they don't. And that may have something to do with the way in which memory is formed. And we think that we have learned something and that it's in a permanent memory, but it's not. So there's a lot of research on the way memory functions in the brain that would be worth checking out. Seeing something over and over doesn't guarantee consolidation, doesn't necessarily mean that you've learned it, right? because there are different ways in which we use knowledge, right? And if we see that Apple logo thousands of times, if we don't use it in some capacity, the brain doesn't hold on to that information, right? So that tells us something about the ways in which learning happens. And all of these kinds of considerations, I think, are important and can be flushed out with an exercise like this. I use this very same exercises in my classes with my students because almost all of them have iPhones, except for the one or two who have Androids. But you know, they think they know the answer like this, and they don't necessarily have the right answer all the time. So we talk about what does this mean about the ways in which you learn, the ways in which you can improve your learning, the ways in which collaboration can help. Now, we're in a virtual environment, which is not my favorite environment, but if we were live, as we would have been last year, I would have had this same exercise for you. I would have put you into small groups, and I know Zoom has the breakout rooms. Well, we don't have the time for that right now. But, you know, in the small groups, you could discuss, you could argue, you could correct each other. And that's where the dynamism of learning really comes alive, because that's when you hear people in the small groups saying, no, 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 no. I told you, I know you're wrong. I know you're right. And it goes on and on and on and on. And people hold each other, learners hold each other accountable for their learning. You know, I even hear people, and when I do this in a classroom, it may not be the Apple logo, it may be some other content knowledge-based information. And I can hear the students saying, now, you didn't read last night. I could tell, you know. So they hold each other accountable for their learning. So there's a lot that can be learned from a simple exercise like that. So there comes a point in the teaching learning continuum where learning becomes paramount. It's the consuming goal of academic discourse. And you can see what happens as we just experienced here. You can see what happens when you put teachers and students into interactive, collaborative settings, even online, where the aim is to learn something. It could be to learn something new. It could be to relearn something old. When you do that, the line between speaker or teacher and learners dissolves. So if you learn something from that exercise, not just about Apple, but about learning and teaching it themselves, if you learned and had fun with that exercise, here's another one. I'm going to share the screen with you and give you, again, a couple of minutes to ponder and maybe enter into the chat which is you think is the correct answer. Let me share the screen again. Now, before I unshare the screen, let me go ahead and read it, because I know that sometimes computer screens can make it difficult to read things, or so I want to be fair to everybody. So let me quickly read them and then I'll unshare the screen. So two of the following statements are true. One is not true. Which one? John Z has taught college for almost 50 years. John Z has taken advantage of his Cuban heritage and Spanish language with Fulbrights to Costa Rica and Chile. John Z holds 6 gold and 4 silver medals in U.S. National Whitewater Canoe Slalom Championships. So one of them is not true. So I'm going to unshare the screen and check out the chat, see what you all have come up with. Okay, very interesting indeed, right? For one thing, I noticed that a good many of you said, there's no way he's taught college for 50 years. He doesn't look old enough for that. So I want to thank you for saying that. I appreciate it a lot. And then some of you picked number 3 as not being true. And I wonder why. Is it because, you know, I was introduced as being a professor of English, right? And we all know that English teachers are kind of wimpy, you know, and and not very athletic, right? They're just into books, right? So maybe that's why you picked it, right? Not too many people pick the second one, even though when I deliberately did not read it aloud at first. I waited until the end before I unshared the screen so that you could hear my Spanish accent, right? Costa Rica, Chile. I thought maybe that might sway you in one direction or the other. So there's all kinds of interesting things that we can learn from inspecting the chat, right? I like the one, somebody says, I presume John Z. Are you John? Yes, that's me. Again, Zubizarreta is a little bit too hard for most people to pronounce. And then, of course, Kathleen King says she picked number 3 only because you paused on the middle number, right? So that was also a deliberate ploy on my part, okay? So let me just stop there and ask you again the same question, okay? Take into consideration, what did you learn about the teaching and learning as processes, okay, from this exercise? How could you adapt it in a way that would help you communicate with students and convey content information in more engaging and interesting, puzzling ways? But also remember, take into consideration that I did some things as a teacher to either throw you off track or put you on track, right? So Kathleen says, for example, that I paused on the middle number. What did you learn? Especially, what did you learn about teaching and learning that you could adapt? Again, I welcome either chat comments or verbal comments. Okay, why don't we start reviewing some of these chat comments? I'm scrolling through them, and some of them jump out just because, they're fun. I don't believe anything John Z says. One of the things I say to my students is that half of what I tell them is true, and the other half is not. And it's their job to find out which is which. So sometimes students tend to want to think that teachers have all the answers, and they become passive learners, right? And they want us to tell them the right answer. So that's a pretty important lesson, I think, for us as teachers and for students to understand that as well. There are comments about being careful about assumptions. Do students come to your classroom with preconceptions about your material? You can bet on it, right? Regardless of the discipline. And I think part of our challenge as teachers is to help them understand their preconceptions and whether those preconceptions are useful or inaccurate. Comments about the importance of being skeptical. I think that's an important trait of a learner. Always question, right? Always question. Here's one, I just noticed one that is rather interesting. I noticed that you did not tell us what the right apple answer was. Is that deliberate in order to frustrate our sense of knowing? What a great observation, right? You notice that I still haven't told you the right answer to the questions about me, right? And that can lead to frustration on the part of learners when the teacher doesn't give them the right answer right off the bat. But you as professionals, as educators, not much different than students. you want to know the right answers, don't you? You really do. I've had people stand up and protest when I would not give them the answer, so I will give you the answer, even though in a virtual setting you can't throw anything at me, but I will tell you the answer. The correct answer for the Apple quiz is B, as in boy. And the correct answer in the second exercise is number 2. I am Cuban, a Cuban American, and I am bilingual in Spanish. I have been to Chile, and I have been to Costa Rica, but I wasn't there on Fulbrights. So I have been teaching college level for almost 50 years, 47 actually to be exact. And I'm counting the 5 years that I taught as a graduate teaching assistant when I taught English composition and literature college courses. So yeah, number 1 is true. And number 3 is also true. I do have 10 medals in U.S. National Whitewater Championships. 6 of them gold, 4 of them silver. Yes. Prejudice is mentioned. Prejudice in learning is important. Somebody made a comment, made an observation about the nonverbals that we unconsciously communicate, right? My accent and my pause, and things like that. They can sometimes have a dramatic influence on the ways in which students learn and the extent to which they learn. Okay, so I believe that the chat is being saved, and this is all being recorded, so you can go back and revisit some of these excellent chat remarks. Wonderful. So if we think about what we've experienced in these exercises as learners, we recognize that the common bond between them is a genuine interest in the enterprise of active learning. And that is as it should be. If we are genuinely inspired here today to address what is excellence in honors teaching, what is talent development, and why learning is even more important today when many contrary voices all around us are saying that what we do does not matter. Teaching excellence is learning excellence. Isn't that what defines the relationship-rich culture of honors that you will hear President Leo Lambert and his colleagues talk about tomorrow? Isn't that what defines honors in general? I believe that if you can return for me to the cartoon about Stripes whistle. Remember the cartoon. In the famous line by the incomparable Lauren Bacall in the classic 1944 film, To Have and Have Not, she so truly says to Humphrey Bogart, "You know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow." So, can you whistle? Wow, excellent. Very good. So maybe good teaching and engaged talent development and learning aren't so useless after all. Or maybe it's just the timeless thrill of Lauren Bacall. But more truthfully, maybe all of you are pretty good learners. Kudos to all of you. You are meeting your responsibilities as excellent scholars and teachers in honors. And kudos to our talented students too. They are meeting their responsibilities as talented honors learners. Without the blend of both, the whistle is silent. Thank you. I'm open for any questions, chat or live otherwise.
Again, if you would like to use your microphone when answering or asking a question, let us know in the chat, then one of our tech assistants will unmute you. Let's give people some time to come up with questions, because it was a very interesting talk, John, very engaging as well, so thank you. But I can also imagine that it made people think. So let's see if they come up with any questions. Thank you, Johnsky, for the masterclass, someone says. In the meantime, I have a question. It's a bit of a general question, but you came up with these very interesting exercises for us. You have to be quite creative to be able to do so. Where do you get your inspiration from?
You know, it's almost a cliche, and but I learned from my teachers, and they inspired me, and they influenced me, and they nurtured me, and they did some of the things that I do in my classroom now, and that I do in conference presentations as well. And that dynamic continues even to this day. I mean, I have people in my life, professional people in honors circles and in faculty development circles, who continue to teach me new things about how to present or how to communicate to others the value, the essential value of good teaching and learning. So I'm always learning from others who are then my teachers, right? So I pay it back.
Oh, you certainly do. Thank you. Marka also asked a question in the chat. Were you ever frustrated because a student wanted to learn something but didn't want to reach the level she wanted?
Oh, that's an interesting direction you took that comment, that question in, because I thought it was, have I ever been frustrated because I wanted a student to learn something that that she didn't want to learn. But yours is a little bit different. Have I been frustrated because a student wanted to learn something, but did not reach the level that she wanted? Right? That's interesting. In a situation like that, yeah, I sure I get frustrated. But what I try to do is I try to turn that frustration into a moment where I can explore with the student different approaches to getting her to learn the way she wants to learn and the way she can learn. So, you know, it's now kind of old hat to talk about how some students learn better visually, experientially, etc. And the nice thing that I really value and enjoy about honors education is that it does try to activate all these different approaches to teaching and to learning, so that we can communicate with students what it is that we're trying to help them learn. So I try to figure out what is it. I try to get the student to tell me what can we do together to help you learn at the level that you want to learn. Can we translate what we're doing in class to something visual? Can we use some auditory approach? Can you do something maybe to I teach literature. Can you transfer what we're trying to say about this particular short story? Can you translate it into a dance or a work of art? Because maybe those are the strengths of the students, right? So I always try to figure out what is it that would help the student learn the way she wants to learn. And then I try to work with her to make that happen. So there is maybe you'll entertain one last question because we're almost right up at the time. The approach of withholding right answers, and students are very, very compulsive about that. You know, especially honor students, right? Because they have basically been successful. They've made a career of always getting the right answer. And that's often why they score high on tests and blah, blah, blah. And I always tell students, you know, you're in honors not necessarily to get all A's. If you get all A's, good for you. I'm proud of you. But that's not really why we're here. We're here not to earn grades, but to learn. And sometimes, often the two go hand in hand, but not always, right? So when I talk to students about grades and about always being compulsive about having the right answer to please the teacher, etc., you know, I try to help them understand that the question also brings up the issue of critical thinking, that, you know, we're trying to not just build knowledge and remember the knowledge. That's only part of a learning taxonomy. There's much more to learning than just knowledge and remembering stuff. And so the right answer isn't always synonymous with deeper learning. So I try to get students to understand that. And I show them Bloom's taxonomy, for example, and we go through the different kinds of questions that could lead to ambiguity, that may not have a right answer. And that's where I try to get them to see that the taxonomy is more than just about remembering knowledge. Q&A, I don't see any.
No, it's already added to the chat. So, but maybe we can take time to answer one more question. We can't answer them all, but. Maybe what is the key takeaway of your own learning from your own teaching?
You know, I use that phrase that I often use, that I don't teach students, I teach each student each time. And I think that that's something that I've learned over time, over a lot of trial and error, over a lot of failures, to learn that students learn differently. And the very same student learns differently each time you encounter that student. So you have to be adaptable, you have to be flexible, you have to take risks as a teacher, just the same as students have to do it as learners. That's my takeaway, I suppose.
Okay, thank you.
Why don't we end here so we can get to the next session on time?
We will. So Professor Zubizarreta, thank you for your interesting and engaging talk on excellence in higher education. May we all achieve deep, significant and lasting learning in ourselves and in our students. However, we also learned that potentially 50% of your talk was untrue. So we get to guess which part, but thank you. Further, I would like to thank all attendees for attending and also for contributing to the discussion. And in about 15 minutes, the last talk of the day will start. Professor Tracy Riley and Dr. Aniek Hilkens will discuss support for scholarship students at Massey University in New Zealand. I encourage you all to join that session. I will end this session with, again, a big thank you to John, and I wish you all a great day and an inspirational rest of the conference. Thank you.